and we're going to come and to join together now. And so I'm going to ask Bob if he can unmute himself. There he is. Hello, Bob.
Evening, Martin.
Great to see you. Welcome to Saturday Night Alive.
It is, and I'm glad we're on the same time zone and we can celebrate together. That was a great song, actually 2 songs in one. That brother, he's got it.
now, I'm just you actually know him, and he's
and several of those guys who are in the band.
Oh, fantastic! Well, let's talk about how you got to that position. So, tell me a little bit about your background. So, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Kansas City, right in the middle of the United States, the third of 3 children in an Orthodox Jewish family.
Now, you got to unpack that a little bit, because you said Orthodox Jewish family. What does it mean to be an Orthodox Jewish family? I mean, is there such a thing as an unorthodox Jewish family?
Oh, yeah. Every Orthodox Jew thinks every non-Orthodox Jew is not only unorthodox, but questionable in their Jewishness. So, look, there are levels in religion, whether it's Uniting Church, Presbyterian, Methodist, whether it's Catholic, there are levels. And the more religion you have, the more you sometimes look down on those outside your particular 4 walls, however they shrink. And so Orthodox Jewish is a category. Mind you, there are subsets within that. The Haredi, the guys with the curls and the caps and the long coats, and there are neo-Orthodox, there are modern Orthodox. I grew up in a home where religion mattered a lot, and I would go to cheder, to afternoon school with my other Jewish mates from public school. So there are some Jewish day schools here in Sydney and in Melbourne and around the world, but I went to a traditional elementary or primary school, middle school, etc. But then every other day, I would go to afternoon Hebrew school, where I'd learn the traditions and the language and the culture of our people.
So, I mean, that means that really your whole day is taken up just with school. Not much time for playing.
Well, and yet somehow I still was able to play. So I don't know how that worked. Maybe because television didn't matter so much and we didn't have screens that mattered. We were just in the moment much more. So Orthodox Jewish for me was a way of life. It was a calling. It was just who I was as a person. So I would go, look, some people complain when they go to your church and they say, you know, it went an hour and 15 minutes today. We had 3-hour services every Saturday morning. And those were the days, mind you, it's the 50s and 60s. I'm turning 70 next month. So, look, we had to wear a tie and we had to wear a jacket and we had those school shoes that kids wear today, but they were binding. That was very normative and we had to behave. My goodness, behavior was so maintained. So but I studied and I learned what it was to be a Jew and practiced how it was to be a Jew. But when I was 16, I went to a youth camp up in the north of the United States in Wisconsin. And I met a Jewish man from New York who confronted me with some of my compromises. You know, religion has a way of, there's Orthodox and conservative, there's liberal Jews. We were negotiable Jews. We wanted to, you know, we'd make it work. So I would drive to synagogue at 16. You could do that back then. I drove and I'd park a block away and walk so it would look like I was very religious because you can't drive on the Sabbath. We had 5 sets of dishes at our home. What? 5 sets? Yeah. You have milk and meat are separated in the Orthodox Jewish world. And then on Passover, meat and milk is separated because it's also separated from leaven. So 4 sets of dishes, that's normal. But the 5th, what's that about? That was for the KFC that my dad would bring in. Now, it's not pork or pig, but it wasn't exactly kosher. So Jimmy, this fellow from New York, confronted me with some of my compromises and said, you know, you're going to be Jewish, be all the way in. And at 16, you know everything. So I said, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I stopped going to my parents' synagogue and walked to a more nearby Orthodox Jewish one. And I stopped eating their food and prepared my own. That's not exactly the way to get along with mom and dad. It was a tough time. I went to uni at 17 in Washington University in St. Louis to be a doctor, because that's what I'd been saying since I was a puppy, you know. And but it was 1969. It was the time of hippies and love, sex, and rock and roll. I mean, drug, sex, and rock and roll. It was just a big, messy time, and I got involved in big mess. And I couldn't put my head together. And by 18 months in, I dropped out of uni on a scholarship, not so smart. But that's what I did, to try to find what were the good hippie words, meaning and relevance. That's what I wanted. So religion took a backseat, and hippiedom, my life as a hippie became much more important. And
so how did you get from that then to becoming a Messianic Jew?
Yeah, it was just a few months later. It was, well, February 71. I was surrounded. This didn't help, but there were 4 country Christians down in Atlanta, Georgia, talking to me on a Sunday afternoon, trying to convert me to their blessed Lord Jesus Christ. Hey, it was a foreign language to both of us, Martin. And and I mocked them, I ridiculed them, I walked away, and I was so angry at those boys. 2 months later, now about April, May of 71, I ran into some more Jesus freaks, as we called them. They had a big old Bible, and they had a big cross around their neck. I thought they were going to try to come at me with the same kind of religion. Well, they were young, though. They didn't have ties on. They were dressed like me. The guy had "Jesus is ... written on his blue jeans. And they were just cool and young and with it. And they said, "You know, the Lord is with you." I went, oh boy, some more of those people. But I sat down, I said, "I'm Jewish, go ahead." I knew what they wanted to do, convert me to their blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus. I'd seen the movies. But Jewish, they flipped to the Old Testament and wanted to convert me with Genesis 1 and Genesis 3, all this stuff. And I listen, I knew the Bible way better than they did. I'd studied it since my youth. So here they challenged me, and I won the Bible battle, but they said, "We don't know all the answers." I'd never heard a religionist admit humility. That blew me away. What? They're out there promoting themselves as evangelists or something. I didn't know, but they said, "We don't know all the answers, but God does. Why don't you go and talk to God yourself?" Well, now Jews don't pray about theology. God's busy at the wall there in Jerusalem, answering prayers for health and prosperity for other people. Leave him alone, he's busy. If you want to know something, go to the books. We got books, we got rabbis, they know everything. So, but that night I did. I prayed, I asked God, I'm sure it was a very sacred prayer, like, who is this Jesus character? And I started reading the pages of that Newer Testament that they gave me. Blew me away. What? Wow, this Jesus was somebody with whom I had to deal. But wait a minute. I'm Jewish, and Jews don't believe in Jesus. But I was overwhelmed. I went to a girl's house 3 days later. I knew she was one of those Jesus freaks, born again. And I said, "I want this Jesus stuff, but I don't want your Jesus." She said, "You don't get this Jesus stuff unless you take Jesus as your Messiah." So there it was, full moon, May of 71. I prayed, I asked Jesus to be my savior. And what does he do? He forgives you right then. You enter into covenant. It's a phenomenal thing. So I was happy. I hugged her. I was forgiven of my sins. It's the joy of my life then, and to this day I remember it. And I ran back, I got in the car and drove back home to Mom and Dad's and said, "Jesus is the Messiah." And he's to say, yeah, that went down. How do you describe a lead balloon?
Yeah, I can imagine.
Oh, mate. So they kicked me out of that.
Oh, they kicked you out.
Yeah, and that Mom made Dad let me stay one more night, and I had to leave the next morning. It was a tough time for them, tough time for me. And honestly, I think when people in the Christian church say, "Why don't Jews are so smart? Why don't they understand?" It's right there in their Bible. And once I show them, I'm sure they'll understand and just join us. Well, there's a social cost to this. The cost of family may not exactly go along with you. The cost of the community may sideline you, and you may not be welcomed in not just synagogue, but in communal affairs and communal activities. You lose your whole Sitzumleben, your whole life situation. It is a massive shift. And I guess at 19, I was able and willing to do that. It still cost me. And honestly, to this day, it still costs me.
What's your relationship like with your parents now?
Well, they passed some years ago, but over the decades, it was on and off. Like all good parents and adult children, it's always tough. Not yours, of course, they're wonderful, but mine
passed too. So yeah, so mine are wonderful at the moment.
Yeah. So it was a tough patch for them to understand when I would go out and be on Christian radio in their city again. And then people would ring my mom and dad, say, "Why aren't you stopping that boy of yours from what?" So I caused them continued pain, which I never wanted to do. And I was so sorry that it had to come. But when you stand for the Lord, sometimes there's secondary boycotts and there's secondary pain. And I never intended that on mom and dad. We got along great towards the end. My mom's mom gave her life to the Lord at 96. My father's older brother, got saved at 63 and died 5 years later. Look, there were moments in different family members' lives when they really seriously saw it and really went in, and others who seriously saw it and backpedaled. And that's painful to watch.
For me, the interesting thing as well, though, is that going from wanting to be a doctor to wanting to go and be an evangelist for Jews is quite a left turn, one would say, or right turn, depending on which way I'm looking at it. How did that happen then? I mean, how did you get to become that?
There was nothing that mattered more to me once I came to the Lord than helping other people to encounter him. So almost immediately, I went back to the bars and went back to the places where I knew people and said, "Jesus loves you," or other great profound statements that I had at 19. What did I know? I'd listened to cassette tapes where Christian teachers were telling us how to understand the religion. I went to church after Bible study, after home group, I went to anything and everything. I was full on. I'd been an activist. Now I'm an activist for Jesus. And it was just a few months later, I moved up to Lawrence, Kansas, where the University of Kansas is. And I started talking on the campus and street corners, and people thought I knew what I was talking about. So they attended meetings that I sponsored, and a church grew, and a church is still going. That church that I started, then called the Mustard Seed, a couple of years ago changed its name to Rev City Church because it had to be cool, and with it, that's fine. And the Mustard Seed, which I thought was cool, was old school 40 years later. But it's still going, and so people thought I knew something. So because, "Oh, you're Jewish. Oh, you must know all the Old Testament." I knew more than they did about the Old Testament. That doesn't mean I knew anything about the New Testament except what I'd been learning and embracing. I've devoured the scriptures. I read it all the time, and it was great, and it's still great. So when I saw what my life had become, it made sense that church should be my puddle where I would linger. But I went back to uni. I became a high school mathematics teacher and taught for 2 years. And in the middle of my second year as a school teacher, I thought, I've got to get back on the horse. I've got to get back to preaching and telling people about God. And I contacted various ministries, one of which was Jews for Jesus. And that was 42 years ago. And 79 that my wife, and she was 8 months pregnant, and I flew out to California. Now that I don't think they'd let you fly at 8 months, but that was the 70s. So we did it and joined the organization. I wasn't 100% saying I want to be an evangelist to Jews. I just wanted to evangelize. And if I could go through the agency of Jews for Jesus, so be it.
So in a sense, you went from there to you actually started running Jews for Jesus in New York. Was one of the places that you were?
Later Well, I was moved to New York City in 1980 and became 2IC there. And then 2IC in Chicago. Then I launched the branch in Washington, D.C. in 1989, and then moved back to New York City and led the branch there in 96. And in 98, there was an opportunity to open something here in Australia. And I thought, that's an adventure. I never imagined that. Let's give it a go. So we came out here a few times, my wife and I, in 95, 96. That's when you and I met.
That's right. Yeah. I think we met in 95, I think, when the first time you came out.
Yeah.
Through our mutual friend, Paul, I think.
That's it. And it was great. And I kept seeing all these people who said, yeah, sort of a Macedonian checklist. That's what I wanted. Is there a need for a Jews for Jesus in Australia? We were already in Canada, and we were already in the former Soviet Union, South Africa, so there were these places where we had launched. Well, Australia? And everybody said, come on. So I kept looking around. Who's the great white hope? Who's the great whom I can mentor from the US? Because who wants to move to Australia? I didn't, but God wanted me to. No, it's all right. I mean,
well, you've been here a long time now. I mean, you're almost a local, so it's one of those things. So
I'll have decades to go before I'm accepted as a local.
Yes, I know. Well, I think your accent, as mine, gives us away. The reason I spoke about New York, of course, is that today, of course, is the anniversary of 9/11. 20 years. I find it hard to believe it's 20 years because I can still remember the night I was watching television at the time, and they broke away to talk about that a plane had crashed into the World Trade Center. You come from New York. I mean, you spend lots of time in New York, and you understand it. What was the feeling like? I mean, you were here already by that stage, but what was the feeling like, back your home in terms of that process, and what's it like 20 years later?
I'll tell you that the way to understand what we went through is that we also were watching The West Wing that evening of September 11th, and it finished at 10:45 p.m. which I always find awkward. Why don't they finish right on the hour or the half hour? And then the TV stayed on for the late news, and then came the crash. And and my wife and I thought, wait, this was an advert for the next week's West Wings. It just seemed so surreal. I'll tell you that from 10:48 or whenever that was until 5 a.m., my wife and I were staring at a television.
Yeah.
Because we just had to be there. We had spent 9 of our years there. We knew not just those buildings, we knew people. We got on the phone, we called people. We had people here in Australia who knew we were Americans, who lived in New York, who rang us at midnight, 1 a.m. Are you up? Are you watching? There was I can't get away from the magnet of that television. I got on the phone, I sent a note immediately to our New York office, to the fellow who took over from me after I left. No response. And so I rang and said, you've got to watch the television. You can't believe. So we were just so connected. It's impossible not to feel great pain because of those. Look, there'd never been a mainland since the Revolutionary War. 1776 to say 1789, maybe the War of 1812 and some attack through New Orleans, maybe some of that, but really in 200 years, there had been 0 attacks onto the mainland of the US, Hawaii, of course, Pearl Harbor in 1941. So there's a vulnerability, there is a feeling of loss that goes beyond, oh, well, there were a couple buildings. It's not that, it's indescribable. And I've reflected on it for these 20 years. And 10 years ago, I wrote a blog on it. Today, I wrote another blog on it. There's that continual feeling of loss, of fear, of, look, whether it's appreciated or not, Americans are fairly proud to be Americans. Patriotism defines itself as waving an American flag. And there were more American flags sold in the next month after 9/11 than ever before, and probably ever since. And people would put them in windows and in their front lawns across the whole country. We didn't know what to do. And the president, God bless him, Bush, didn't know what to do. And so he declared war on an ism, which is always an interesting thing to do. You don't beat isms with bullets, but there was such a, not a knee jerk, but a whole body jerk reaction against the pain and suffering that was inflicted by 27 madmen. Almost 3,000 people died that day. But nothing is the same ever since. You don't go, I remember running into New York, running into LaGuardia Airport 15 minutes before a flight to Boston and hopping on a flight. You didn't have queues, you didn't have metal checking devices, you didn't have the super screening that exists now that's just normal as could be. In the world.
Sorry, Bob, I think you're on the microphone. Your hand might be on the microphone. Sorry.
No.
Okay. Look, what's it like now, though, 20 years later?
The fear continues that somebody is going to be like an Al-Qaeda, like an Osama bin Laden. There's going to be somebody that everybody's looking over their shoulder now in a way that had never been before. Yes, there were hijacked airplanes, but never hijacked and flown into buildings. And the hijacked airplanes were from, say, Jacksonville, Florida, or Washington, D.C. down to Miami. And somebody would go up to the pilot and say, fly me to Cuba. Okay. And that was always a fear, but to hijack and fly into a building, never before heard of. And that fear that's ever boiling under the surface sometimes rises to the surface. And you see that, and there's a loss of innocence and a loss of positivity when you go through an airport, much like we have in our day with somebody. Look, you walk down the footpath. Our office, of course, is in Bondi Junction. You walk down the footpath and somebody's approaching you, you give them an incredible amount of space. All of a sudden, because they've got this plague and you don't want to catch the plague from them. You're both wearing masks, but there's this fear and socially, not distant, but yeah, it's a social distance that's beyond physical distancing. That may be the best term.
But is it, I suppose, in a sense that what we're becoming now is almost that on one level we became afraid of terrorists. Now with COVID, we're almost becoming afraid of each other.
Oh, totally.
Yeah. And so that distance might be hard to ever breach again, because from what you're saying is that 20 years later, it hasn't healed the original breach. So in some ways that distance created, and now it creates again through COVID, will be the issue.
There's so much hostility racially in the United States. Some say, oh, no, it doesn't exist. And I think, what country do you live in? Because it's insidious. The amount of anti-Arab or anybody, remember when we had the Cronulla riots some years ago, 10, 11 years ago here in Sydney, and they talked about people of Middle Eastern appearance. That was a big term that was used. And now we quelled that. We quelled that. But racism knows no bounds in the US. And you get a group of all white people who say, we down in the South or up in wherever, you say, look, there's this we look, Black people, they're all right, Latinos, they're okay, as long as they stay where they are and we stay where we are. Well, there's no us them in a one country idea. Hine matov umanayim sheverachim gam yachad. Behold, which means don't miss it. How good, how pleasant it is for brothers to dwell together in unity. A couple of those guys on the stage with Joshua Aaron are Gentiles, born, bred, and buttered Gentiles who have lived in Israel for yonks and who speak Hebrew better than most of my Hebrew teachers from my youth. They're indistinguishable because they're in unity. And that's something that I long for wherever I go, and gets me in trouble because it's okay to be a Gentile and love Jesus. You know, of course you do. That's what the Apostle Paul said. So that's, I've gotten in a little bit of warm, if not hot water.
Okay, no, I can understand that, and it's coming from South Africa. I certainly understand the intent of that too, from my background too. Look, I suppose what I want to focus on in this little section is the work of Jews for Jesus, and kind of some of the responses that we work from there. I joined you once in San Francisco at a Jews for Jesus conference, or kind of meeting or gathering. And it was fantastic to actually be in that environment where everyone was giving reports about what was happening around the world. How are things going? I mean, the church as a whole in the West is having its own particular issues, particularly with younger people. How's things going for Jews for Jesus?
We are seeing good, not great responses. We don't want to broadcast triumph when it's steady. No, it's the greatest moment since the Apostle Paul. No, it's not. It's steady as she goes. And when the boom hits, you'll hear about it. We're going to be honest about reporting. That's one of those things about, I remember being in a meeting with a group of really prominent Christian church leaders, and I represented all of Messianic Judaism. And I thought, you guys don't have any idea. Nobody represents it. We don't have a pope, and if we did, we'd tall poppy him. But they said, somebody said, well, there were how many people at such and such, televangelistically speaking? And I said, I really appreciate each one of you being in this room, but don't ever use that term, because that's a slur on yourselves. Anyway, so we're steady as she goes. We're being faithful, and that's probably the most important thing. We're in 11 countries, Budapest, Hungary, we're in Joburg, we're in several cities in Ukraine and Russia, even Belarus. We're trying our darndest in London and Paris. New York and Los Angeles are our two major flagships in the US. We're here, and everywhere we go, we're trying to reach our people. We're relentlessly pursuing God's plan for the salvation of the Jewish people. That's who we are. That's our heartthrob. And in Jerusalem, we just opened this year. We've been in Tel Aviv since 98, 99. We got our Amutah, which is nonprofit status. And we did not do like so many say, well, we're gonna hand out food and clothing. We said straight up, we are evangelists, and we tell our Jewish people about the gospel of Jesus. In those days, our mission statement was that now I've even forgotten it, but that we wanted to make the messiahship of Jesus an unavoidable issue to our Jewish people worldwide. So that was who we were, who we still are. So they knew who we are, and they signed off and said, yeah, they can be here. So in Tel Aviv, we've been for years evangelizing on the street corners. And one of the things that we've come up with was kind of a triad. We wanted to go and tell, absolutely. We want to go tell our people. We wanted to come and see. We wanted to invite them to come to our services or whatnot. But lately, in the last couple of years, well, 3 years, we've moved into as well having a love and serve attitude, where we've raised loads of money to feed homeless people on the streets of Tel Aviv and now Jerusalem, where we've worked together with a ministry that deals with prostitutes and drug addicts. And we are seeing very good response. Literally almost every week, we have a decision for somebody to get off the street and go towards rehab, something like that. These are Jews. I mean, when I worked there in 2018, I think the number was 947 people who were on the streets, homeless. Now that's all right. It's not even 1,000 out of the million that are living in, or 600,000 Jews living in Jerusalem in those days. But still, those are people for whom Yeshua died, and we have to care. So one of our women, sorry, who got her social degree, social
science, yeah,
social work degree. Did I just? I need some more coffee. She got her social work degree. She's recruited a team, and they're ministering to these people in a way that I'm just blown away how good they are there in Jerusalem. When I went in 2017, 2018, of course, we got knocked out the last couple of years from travel, so I can't go and help them, but we will get back there. God bless Gladys and Skoma. We're going to get there. I'm going to get out of the country and be able to go back to Jerusalem, not just to be there at that wall in Jerusalem where Joshua was singing and walk through the markets where he was walking. I've done all that, praying at the wall, all that, but where I can help and assist with the Love and Serve ministry. In 2018, I was, Sydney, in 2018, I was able to, over the course of 4 weeks, have 167 Christian volunteers from around the globe come and serve with me for a week each. And it was fantastic. I remember there was a German man who came with a team of 6. He was a man of age. He was a little older. The other 5 were in their 20s and 30s. But he felt the leading of the Lord to come and serve the Jewish people in a way he'd never done before. He was well aware of Germans' hostility in the day against Jewish people. Well, I set him into a position to go serve at Beit Avot, this old folks' home, and to go bounce balls with them or help play checkers or chess or just different things, and to be there just to love and serve these people. One day, he said he knew no Hebrew and he knew no English. He only knew German and probably several other European languages. Well, one day he sat next to an elderly Jewish woman, and they found out she knew German and Russian and Hebrew. And so he was able to have a conversation with this German-speaking Russian Jewess. He actually, in that half hour that he sat with her, shared the gospel with her. She took it on board. He prayed with her to receive the Lord. He said, I had no idea why I came to Jerusalem, to serve among the Jews. And there he was able to do that. And moments like that, when we saw her the next day, because I was going to several of the places, overseeing, etc., and bouncing the balls and playing checkers and playing piano and singing Hebrew songs with them, and then singing a Jesus song like Gadol Elohai, how great is our God.
Yep.
And to see the joy in this woman's face who had prayed the day before to receive the Lord. Martin, you would believe it because you've seen it, just how glorious that was. So we're seeing in the Go and Tell, in the Love and Serve, and the Come and See ministry globally, we're seeing more and more young people come in who want to serve God, and we're giving them opportunities on social media. Man, the world is so different today. Look what we're doing right now. We're having a webinar. 10 years ago, we'd have said, I don't know what that is. And if you want people to hear, I've got to travel out to Beecroft or Pennant Hills and sit in a building, and we got to do stuff. But the world has turned on a dime, as we say. Now, it's fantastic to watch Jewish people globally adjust their anti-thinking about God, or Jesus, sorry, to a more moderate position. Not that they're for Jesus yet, but they're a much more moderate than they were when I was brand new in the Lord.
Wow. So in a sense, there's more receptivity than there would have been before.
Well, let's say they're open-minded, but not receptive to the gospel. That's still a miracle. And somebody goes from darkness to light in the apostolic term or the Isaiah term. When when we see somebody transform on the Engel scale from -3 to -2, boom, and he really comes to faith, that's fantastic. But there is more openness in a social setting to Christianity, not in the Haredi community necessarily, the ultra-Orthos, but definitely in ordinary Jewish people in St. Ives or in Bondi or in Vaucluse or in St. Kilda around the country. Because there is Jewish people, you know, we love social justice. We cheer the underdog, and that's what we want. So if a Christian is being maligned, some Jewish people say, "Hey, leave them alone. They're good." It's just fascinating to watch. Now, one other point on that. It is coming from the academic world, not the synagogue world, not directly from synagogue down. Here's what I mean. Around the turn of the 20th century, guys like Montefiore and even, I suppose, Schweitzer would talk about In Search of the Historical Jesus. And they, as Jews, were saying, we ought to be open-minded to the Jesus of the first century. Now, that kind of stayed in the academic world. And in the 60s, you get Vermes and Flusser in the 70s and 80s, and you get all these prominent Jewish scholars saying, Jesus is just all right with me. I mean, it's kind of an academics meet the Doobie Brothers. It's a fascinating thing for me to watch. Amy Jill Levine is a friend of mine. She, you might know her writings.
No, very well.
Yeah, well, we've known each other for yonks, and I'm going to be in Nashville, God willing, in November, and I'll go to her office and we'll hang out. I remember the first time we met here in Sydney, and she said, I asked if we could knock it around because she's open-minded to this Jesus character. She wrote the book, The Misunderstood Jew, about Jesus, and the short stories by Jesus, which is all about his parables. And I asked her, could we have a conversation? Could we knock this around? She said, buy me a beer. I'll sit with you anyway. So we did, and we became fast friends, and it's been great. But here she is, the head of the religion department at Vanderbilt University, which is a Methodist university. All the PhD students in religion have to cross her desk. She's an Orthodox Jew who doesn't believe in Jesus. You think, how does that happen? So because of the academics trickling down this into normalized PhD Jewish students and scholars, now if you will, the infection has happened in the synagogue, so that synagogues say, yeah, let's talk about this first century and not be scandalized by the Jesus of it. That is a fantastic change. But it doesn't mean they're open to Jesus as Savior.
But in many ways, that's the work of the Holy Spirit rather than the work of academe. But the fact is that you need some soil to plant that seed into, and the soil is becoming tilled to do that.
Yeah, yeah.
So it sounds like you still, even though you say you're approaching 70 and you've been doing this since 1979, that you don't seem to have lost any of your passion or enthusiasm.
Thank God. Thank God. I've lost a little bit of energy, just in natural terms. I still am an avid tennis, golf, and really pickleball player. Pickleball became my passion some years ago, and I became the president of Pickleball New South Wales. I founded it. And then I became the chairman of Pickleball Australia because I was on the first ground level of that. And but more than the governance, I want everybody to pick up a paddle and go have a play. So I just translate or morph my passion for anything into, I'm still an evangelist, you know, I still want people to get the benefits of knowing God, for being forgiven of their sins, having a good energy expense like pickleball, you know, that kind of thing. I still want people to benefit from, hey, I found the best hamburger in town, that kind of thing. I think I'm hardwired to promote. I'm hardwired to be an evangelist. So will I ever retire? My wife says he'll never retire. He's still going to do this, wherever he is. I've got 4 grandchildren on the outside and 1 coming, literally within hours.
Wow.
In Nashville. And I look forward to hearing the gender of grandchild 5. I spent 3 hours with grandchildren's 2 and 4 today, and that was deliberate and of joy. So I have passion for family, passion for the Bible, passion for gospel teaching. I run a bookshop in Bondi Junction where you can get those Joshua Aaron CDs, where you can get Amy Jill Levine's books. I still run that, and I still, even just now, while watching that, I reminded myself of some order I have to do for some lady who rang today. And you know what that feels like.
I do.
You don't want to forget anybody. So I'm a passionate person who's found the joy of my life in Jesus, the love of my life in my wife of 44 years. I love my family. I love the staff of Jews for Jesus worldwide. God's given me a lot of emotion, and I am grateful for all that.
Wonderful. I think that's an appropriate place for us to stop and to say, Bob, thank you very much for sharing some of your life with us and your journey with us and your passion with us, because the passion is always infectious as much as anything else. Passion infects people. And I pray that it may infect us with a sense of wanting to explore what faith is about and the connections with it. So, Bob, thank you very much for coming and being with us tonight. Really appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you. You've said that you join us for our little gathering afterwards, our Zoom meeting after the meeting, after this gathering. And so please, click onto that, and we look forward to seeing you then, and people can interact with you depending on who stays. So thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate your connection with us tonight.
Shalom.